In the streets where Hollywood dreams were born and millions came seeking their fortune, silence has become the new currency of survival. Los Angeles is being abandoned. Downtown LA, the place that was supposed to be the city's crown jewel of urban renewal, now transforms into a ghost town before the clock strikes 10 a.m. The shuttered storefronts, the empty towers, the deserted plazas, everything seems to scream a truth nobody wants to admit it. Something changed in the soul of this city, and what you're about to discover explains why millions of people decided it's no longer worth staying here. You remember that feeling of walking through Pershing Square on a weekday afternoon when you had to navigate through office workers on lunch breaks, street performers, food trucks, tourists snapping photos of the Art Deco buildings? You remember the smell of street tacos mixing with coffee from corner cafes, the sound of construction cranes promising endless growth, the energy of a downtown reinventing itself. That was downtown Los Angeles. That was the place where the city's heart was supposed to beat stronger than ever. But now, at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, when the city should be at peak activity, you can stand in the middle of Broadway and count fewer than 30 people across 4 blocks. The historic buildings remain standing, magnificent and imposing, but now they look more like mausoleums than monuments. The empty windows stare at you like sockets without eyes, and the echo of your own footsteps bounces off walls that once absorbed the chaos of millions of voices. The transformation began quietly, almost invisibly. First came the small businesses that had operated for generations. Mr. Chen, who ran a fabric store on South Spring Street for 38 years, was one of the first to close. When asked why, he simply said, "Nobody comes anymore." And he was right. The data shows that foot traffic in downtown LA decreased by 62% between 2019 and 2024. 62%! More than half the people who once walked these streets decided they no longer needed to be here. But the pandemic doesn't explain the whole story. Other American downtowns recovered. New York bounced back. Chicago, too. Even San Francisco, with all its well-documented struggles, maintained more street life than LA. So what makes Los Angeles different? The answer lies in something nobody saw coming: reverse gentrification on steroids. For years, the official narrative promoted the idea that downtown needed to be saved, cleaned, modernized. They invested billions in remodeling buildings, creating cultural spaces, attracting international capital and tech companies. And it worked too well. Rental prices multiplied by 7 in less than a decade. The families who had lived here for generations were pushed out to the periphery. Local businesses couldn't compete with international chains paying astronomical rents. But here's the twist nobody anticipated. Those international chains didn't stay either. Whole Foods closed its flagship downtown location in 2023. Apple shut down its concept store on Broadway. Even the high-end restaurants that were supposed to anchor the revival started relocating to West Hollywood and Santa Monica. What remained was a void, a space too expensive for locals but too empty for corporations. Downtown became no man's land. You walk down Spring Street on a Wednesday at 10:30 in the morning. Before, this street was an impossible human river to navigate. Now, you can extend your arms and spin in circles without touching anyone. The commercial spaces have for lease signs that have been hanging for months. Some don't even have signs anymore, just windows covered with yellowing newspapers and accumulated dust. On the corner with 5th, there's a Beaux Arts building of 12 stories completely vacant. The windows on the 4th floor have broken glass. On the 7th, you can see tattered curtains swaying in the wind entering through frames without glass. This building, according to public records, was purchased in 2015 by a Singapore investment fund for $47 million. Today, it's valued at $14 million. The investors lost almost 70% of their capital. And they're not alone. It's estimated that more than 3,000 properties in downtown LA are in similar situations, bought at inflated prices during the gentrification boom, now abandoned because nobody wants to pay those rents and the owners refuse to lower prices enough to attract new tenants. But what's truly disturbing isn't the empty buildings, it's the absence of human life. There are entire streets where, if you close your eyes, you could think you're in a city evacuated after some disaster. The sound of traffic remains on main arteries, But on side streets, that constant urban hum that defines big cities simply disappeared. You can hear the wind. You can hear birds. You can hear your own thoughts with a clarity that feels almost disturbing in what's supposed to be the center of one of America's largest metropolises. The few pedestrians you encounter walk quickly, eyes straight ahead, as if crossing hostile territory. Nobody stops to window shop because most windows are empty. Nobody sits on plaza benches because the plazas have become territories reclaimed by homeless encampments and drug dealers who no longer need to hide because there's no authority bothering them. The restaurants that survived had to adapt or die. Before, an average downtown restaurant could expect 300 diners on a weekday. Now, if 70 show up, it's a good day. Many closed. Those remaining operate with minimal staff, reduced menus, and a quiet desperation you can feel in how the waiters greet you, with a mixture of relief and surprise that someone actually walked in. The original Pantry Cafe, an institution since 1924, reported in 2023 its worst year since the Great Depression. Let me repeat that. Worse than the Depression. Worse than the recession of 2008. Worse than the pandemic. A restaurant that survived 100 years of Los Angeles history almost closed because simply nobody comes downtown to eat like before. And here's the part nobody wants to discuss openly: safety. Officially, crime statistics in downtown dropped. The city points to this as evidence the area is safer than ever. But the reality is more sinister. Crimes dropped because there aren't enough potential victims anymore. The pickpockets went where the people are. The muggers, too. What remained is something worse: territorial occupation criminality. Organized groups controlling entire blocks, not to assault pedestrians, but to operate illicit businesses in abandoned buildings. On San Pedro Street, between 4th and 6th, there are at least 7 properties functioning as distribution warehouses for stolen goods and drug operations. Everyone in the neighborhood knows it. The police know it. But nobody does anything because officially there are no visible crimes. The buildings are illegally occupied, but since there are no owners claiming them or legitimate tenants reporting, these operations continue without interference. The irony is brutal. Downtown emptied precisely because of policies designed to save it. The pedestrianization of entire streets, which was supposed to make the area more attractive, made it less accessible for those depending on public transit. The vehicle circulation restrictions, implemented to reduce pollution, cut supply routes for small businesses. The new underground parking garages are so expensive, nobody uses them. Stricter regulations on street vendors eliminated that informal economy that, though chaotic, kept streets full of human activity. In attempting to create an idealized, clean version of downtown, authorities sterilized the life out of it. They turned LA's cultural heart into an open-air museum nobody wants to visit. International tourists still come, but in declining numbers. Travel agencies now recommend visits of no more than 3 hours in downtown, preferably in groups and during mornings. Online reviews are filled with comments about how disappointing and abandoned the area feels. A British tourist wrote in 2024, "Expected to find the vibrant heart of Los Angeles. Instead, found empty streets and a palpable sadness." It's like the city lost its soul and nobody noticed until it was too late. That last phrase captures something profound: the sense that a point of no return was crossed without anyone really perceiving it at the moment. The historic buildings continue deteriorating. You walk down Broadway, the street of grand movie palaces, and you can see cracks in Art Deco facades from the 1920s that nobody repairs. Ornate cornices crumbling, terracotta tiles falling. These buildings require constant maintenance, but maintenance requires rental income, and income disappeared. It's a vicious circle. Buildings deteriorate, the few remaining tenants leave, more buildings go vacant, more deterioration. Some preservation experts estimate that if this trend continues, we could lose up to 40% of downtown's historic structures in the next 20 years, not from natural disasters or intentional demolitions, but simply from abandonment and gradual collapse. Let's talk about the real numbers. In 2010, downtown LA had approximately 58,000 permanent residents. By 2025, that figure dropped to less than 34,000. 24,000 people abandoned in 15 years. Commercial density fell from an average of 96 active businesses per block to 37. More than half the shops closed. Average commercial property values dropped 53% in real terms. Hotel occupancy in the downtown perimeter fell from 82% to 41%. These aren't minor adjustments. This is economic collapse. This is an urban zone entering a death spiral. But wait, because there's something even more disturbing in all this. Despite the evident collapse, sale prices of properties in downtown didn't drop proportionally. Why? Because many of these buildings were purchased by foreign investment funds that keep them on their books at inflated valuations to avoid reporting losses. These funds prefer maintaining vacant properties, losing money on basic maintenance costs and property taxes, rather than selling at a loss and admitting their investment strategy was a catastrophic failure. This creates an absurd situation where completely abandoned buildings are listed for sale at prices nobody will pay, while potential local buyers or tenants are completely priced out of the market. Downtown became hostage to the balance sheets of international corporations that prefer accounting fiction over economic reality. Weekends tell a slightly different but equally depressing story. Saturdays and Sundays, some tourists still visit. They arrive, take photos at Pershing Square, visit the Broad Museum and Grand Central Market, eat something, and leave before dark. Nobody stays. Downtown is no longer a destination, but a waypoint. The nightlife that existed, the bars and restaurants that stayed open late, almost all closed. After 8 p.m., downtown is genuinely dangerous territory. Public lighting, though improved in theory, can't compensate for the absence of eyes on the street, that basic urban principle that safety comes from having people present. Empty streets, no matter how well lit, are dangerous streets. The workers who still have offices downtown developed survival strategies. They arrive by car or Uber directly to private parking garages. They go up to their offices without walking the streets. They order food delivery instead of going out. And they leave before afternoon falls. Some office buildings have occupancy rates below 15%. Entire floors empty. Lobbies that look like post-apocalyptic movie sets. The building at 355 South Grand Avenue, a 29-story office tower, currently has only 4 floors occupied. The other 25 are completely empty. The automatic lights no longer work on most of those floors. At night, the building looks like an illuminated skull, with only 4 floors lit amid total darkness. The situation of street vendors is particularly tragic. For decades, they were seen as a problem, as something that dirtied downtown's image. Authorities removed them systematically. But what nobody calculated is that these vendors were downtown's circulatory system. They brought people. They created movement. They generated that chaotic but vital energy that defines American cities. Without them, downtown lost its pulse. Some tried to return, but found there aren't enough customers to sustain their businesses anymore. The few remaining concentrate in very specific locations, creating small islands of activity surrounded by vast oceans of urban void. The churches of downtown, which used to be full for daily masses, now struggle to maintain congregations. St. Vincent de Paul, Our Lady of Angels Cathedral, both report dramatic drops in attendance. Not because people stopped being religious, but because they no longer live nearby, and it's not worth making the trip specifically to come downtown. The churches tried adapting with more flexible schedules, with shorter services, but nothing compensates for the basic reality that their physical community disappeared. Some are considering merging or closing weekday operations, maintaining services only on Sundays. The museums of downtown show strange numbers. The Museum of Contemporary Art reports decent attendance. The Japanese American National Museum, too. But these are specific destinations where people enter, visit, and exit immediately, without interacting with the surrounding area. They don't generate the type of foot traffic that sustains local businesses. It's hit-and-run tourism. I arrive, see what I came to see, I leave. The economic multiplier effect that cultural tourism is supposed to generate simply isn't working because there's no functional commercial infrastructure around to capture that spending. Let's talk about revitalization attempts. There have been several. In 2022, the city government launched a program called Downtown Comeback with tax incentives for businesses opening new locations in the area. It failed. Only 23 businesses applied, and of those, 17 closed within the first year. Tax incentives didn't compensate for lack of customers. In 2023, they tried an affordable housing program, converting abandoned buildings into low-cost apartments. Sounded good on paper. In reality, few wanted to move in. Families didn't want to raise children in an area without functioning schools, without accessible supermarkets, without safe parks. Young professionals didn't want to live in an area perceived as dangerous and without nightlife. The converted buildings remain mostly empty. The question everyone asks but nobody can answer satisfactorily is, what comes next? Some urban theories suggest downtown will eventually hit bottom and bounce back, that prices will drop enough to attract a new wave of residents and businesses. But others are more pessimistic. They point out that once an urban area enters this spiral, recovery is extremely difficult. Detroit is the most cited example, an urban core that collapsed and never recovered its former vitality. The big question is whether Los Angeles will allow its downtown, the place where the city was founded, where countless fortunes were made, to become a West Coast version of Detroit's dead zones. Some speculators suggest downtown's future lies in complete cultural conversion, making the entire area a type of historic theme park, a place that exists primarily for controlled tourism, without significant permanent residents, without organic economy. Basically, turning the heart of Los Angeles into a sanitized urban museum. It's an idea that repels serious urbanists but gains traction among those who see no other viable solution. The alternative is admitting that downtown could simply become a vast abandoned district in the middle of one of the world's largest cities, a massive urban scar that everyone prefers to avoid. The psychological effects on Angelenos are difficult to measure but impossible to ignore. There exists a collective feeling of loss, of having lost something fundamental about the city's identity. Downtown wasn't just a geographic place. It was a symbol. It was where everyone, rich and poor, from Malibu and from Compton, met on common ground. It was the only truly democratic space of the city. Its emptying represents something deeper than economics or urbanism. It represents the fragmentation of collective urban identity. Los Angeles is becoming an archipelago of separated enclaves without a unifying heart. And that fundamentally changes what it means to be an Angeleno. The tech boom that was supposed to save downtown became part of its death sentence. When companies like Google and Apple announced offices downtown, property values skyrocketed. Landlords evicted long-term tenants to make room for tech workers who never came in the numbers promised. Then the pandemic normalized remote work, and suddenly all those expensive office spaces designed for tech companies sat empty. The tech workers who did exist chose to work from home in the suburbs or moved to cheaper cities entirely. Downtown was left with office towers built for a workforce that evaporated overnight. The homeless crisis is both symptom and cause of downtown's death. As housed residents left, homeless populations increased. But it's more complex than just numbers. The concentration of services for homeless in downtown created a magnetic effect. People in crisis gravitated here because this is where services existed. This increased visible suffering on the streets, which drove away more housed residents and businesses, which created more empty buildings for homeless encampments, which drove away more businesses. It's a feedback loop nobody seems able to break. Skid Row, once contained to a few blocks, has effectively expanded to encompass much of downtown. You can walk 30 blocks and see tents on every other street. The failure of public transit to adequately serve downtown is another piece of the puzzle. Despite billions invested in the metro system, many parts of LA remain car-dependent. Getting to downtown by public transit from most neighborhoods requires multiple transfers and over an hour of travel time. So even people who might want to visit downtown for work or entertainment choose not to because the journey is too difficult. The city designed a downtown for pedestrians in a region that never stopped being fundamentally car-centric. It's an impossible contradiction that doomed the revival from the start. Corporate headquarters that announced downtown relocations with great fanfare quietly left. In 2021, Warner Music Group moved its headquarters from downtown to Burbank. In 2022, USC moved several administrative offices out of downtown to its main campus. In 2023, the law firm O'Melveny moved to Century City. Each departure was explained as consolidation or better serving clients, but everyone understood the real reason. Downtown had become undesirable. When companies making location decisions worth millions of dollars vote with their feet, that sends a message impossible to spin away. The food hall revolution that was supposed to anchor downtown's revival became another cautionary tale. Grand Central Market upgraded from local vendors to trendy restaurants, raised prices, and initially saw huge success. But as foot traffic declined, even the trendy places couldn't survive. By 2024, half the stalls in Grand Central Market were vacant or rotating through tenants every few months. The model of high-end food halls works in areas with sustained foot traffic. In empty downtown, it was a beautiful failure. The Arts District, once held up as the model for creative gentrification done right, followed the same trajectory. Artists moved in when spaces were cheap. Their presence made the area cruel. Developers noticed and built expensive lofts and galleries. Original artists got priced out. The wealthy people who moved in didn't create the organic, creative community that made the Arts District interesting in the first place. Now it's just expensive and empty, the worst of both worlds. Galleries close because collectors don't want to come downtown. The remaining artists can't afford rent. Another once vibrant neighborhood reduced to architectural shells. Let's talk about something almost nobody mentions: the sound. Cities have a sound. New York has its symphony of horns and voices and subway rumble. Chicago has its elevated trains and wind off the lake. Healthy downtown LA used to have layers of sound: car horns, Spanish and English and Korean and a dozen other languages mixing, construction, music from shops, laughter, arguments, life. Now, walk through downtown at 10 a.m. and the dominant sound is silence, punctuated by occasional cars passing. It's the sound of absence. It's the sound of a city that used to be and no longer is. The parking situation would be darkly funny if it weren't so sad. Downtown has more parking spaces now than at any point in its history. Massive new garages built during the boom years. But they sit mostly empty because there's nowhere worth parking for. Meanwhile, the few businesses still operating complain parking is too expensive or too far from their locations. The city built infrastructure for a level of activity that never materialized and now can't maintain. Schools are closing. Once the surest sign of a failing neighborhood, school closures in downtown accelerated after 2020. With fewer families living downtown, there aren't enough students to justify keeping schools open. This creates another feedback loop. Families considering downtown see no schools and choose to live elsewhere, which further reduces the student population, which leads to more closures. The few schools remaining are under-enrolled, underfunded, and struggling. The loft conversions that symbolized downtown's renaissance in the 2000s are now half empty. These warehouse conversions that sold for $800 to $1.2 million at peak are now listed for $400,000 with no buyers. Some owners are renting them at prices far below their mortgages just to have some income. Others sit vacant, their owners unable to sell without taking devastating losses, unable to rent at prices that would cover costs. These lofts were supposed to create a permanent residential base downtown. Instead, they're just more expensive, empty boxes. City officials cycle through the same responses: announcement of new task forces, promises of increased police presence, press releases about new initiatives. None address the fundamental economics. You can't police your way out of an economic death spiral. You can't press release your way to vitality. The forces that empty downtown are structural and deep, and fixing them would require admitting the entire urban strategy of the last 20 years was fundamentally flawed. That's an admission no politician wants to make. The buildings stare at you with empty windows. The streets stretch silent under the mid-morning sun. The ghosts of millions of conversations, transactions, encounters still seem to float in the air, but without substance, without form. Downtown Los Angeles is becoming its own memorial, a monument not to what it was, but to what was lost through greed, through poor planning, through the arrogance of believing we could improve what already worked without really understanding why it worked. Maybe the saddest part of all is that this didn't happen. It wasn't a natural disaster. It wasn't war. It was a series of human decisions, each seemingly reasonable in the moment, that collectively destroyed something precious. And now, walking these streets at 10 in the morning, surrounded by silence where there should be life, you can feel the weight of those decisions. You can feel the cost of forgetting that cities aren't just buildings and streets, they're people. And when the people leave, what remains isn't a city, it's just its skeleton. If you ever walked through downtown when it was still alive, when it still breathed, when it still promised to be the beating heart of Los Angeles, share that memory in the comments. And if this opened your eyes to what's really happening, subscribe, because the next story will reveal where all those people are fleeing to, and what they're building there might be even more disturbing than what they left behind.